Panic pics.
I'm a sophomore in college in a house full of 4 girls, including myself. We live in the student housing sector and went all out for Halloween decorations, girly ones at that. We live facing towards the main street of the neighborhood, and our backyard has a bunch of trees and bushes. There's also a little trail to the back door, but it is in a really weird place and is away from the main sidewalk. In terms of our actual house, there is a rather large window on our back door, and we didn't have any window coverings, so it was clear as day to see into our whole bottom floor when looking through it. I know that we should have covered it up sooner, but we didn't think that this was an urgent matter. Now, one night, my roommate and I were watching a movie and both fell asleep on the couch. I never sleep on that couch, and neither does she. It's super uncomfortable. In fact, we both woke up at separate times this night and just decided to stay on the couch rather than walking the 10 steps to our room. Looking back, I feel that it was just a little intuition that we had, or even a guardian angel that made us do this. We also had fallen asleep with almost every light imaginable on, so anyone peering through any window could see us on the couch clearly and all of our girly decor. It was about 5 in the morning, and I get woken up by my roommate shaking me, saying, B, get up, there's somebody trying to get in." I instantly shoot up hearing that, see her terrified face looking at the back door, then instantly turn my head. And I see a man standing with a hoodie on, holding a flashlight, trying to pick our lock. I can still remember the scratching noise that he made with, well, whatever he was using. It definitely was not the sound of keys jingling or anything, more of a thin wire against metal sound. As we were both staring at him at this point, frozen in fear, he stopped. All 3 of us were just looking at each other for about a minute when he slowly backed away from the door. My first instinct was to run to the door and make sure it was locked. I've never been so scared walking up to a door like that, and I never want to feel like that again. We quickly called the police and some friends in the area. The police came about 45 minutes later, and they just told us to call if anything else happens. They said that it could be a drunk college student or a person with bad intentions, but we will never know. I still get a sick feeling thinking about it, and hope that it was just a drunk mistake, but something tells me that it was not. We quickly installed more cameras, door window stoppers, and covers for every part of the house after that. 3 weeks later, and we actually had a break-in, but that's a story for another time. I am interested in hearing people's thoughts about this, though, and if you have any insights as to whether or not this person was just a drunk college guy, or if they were actually trying to break in. This happened to me years ago when I was about 13 or maybe 14. I grew up in a small to mid-sized city in the West, pretty safe in a quiet middle-class neighborhood. This was back when I was still bought into organized religion, and I was going to an overnight lock-in at the church gym. For the non-Christian kids who aren't familiar, it's basically a huge Jesus-focused sleepover for teens. The church was only about a 10 to 12 minute walk from my house, and the quickest way to get there was to cut across a park right next to the elementary school. This was the early 2000s, so I definitely grew up in the age of stranger danger and teaching girls to always be vigilant. On the other hand, I was walking a short distance through my own neighborhood to the church, and I was very responsible for my age. I was an older sister, always the babysitter, and my parents had okayed me walking by myself and would drop by with my sleeping bag and pillow after they picked up my little brother from practice. I was running a little bit late, so the sun was just setting as I approached the park. As I crunched my way across the grass next to the tennis courts, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Turning my head, I saw a figure, clearly a man, dressed in dark clothing and leaning against the brick wall of the school. He was kind of tucked into an alcove formed where the building met the fence around the playground, out of sight from the road, and the man was standing just outside of the halo of the light from the lamp above a nearby door. The man was just sort of lounging in the crux of the wall and the fence, but what initially caught my eye was the flicker of the lit cigarette in his mouth. It was too dark to see his features, but I could tell, as I noticed him, that he was already watching me. He was a fair distance away across the grass, but it was just open space between us at this point. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. I then felt that uneasy tingle creep down my spine. I suddenly realized that I was alone in the growing dark, and he was some unknown man tracking me with his eyes that I couldn't make out. Instead of continuing to cut diagonally across the park, I veered right toward the sidewalk and the street so that I wouldn't come too close to him. I walked a little faster, trying to shake off my uneasiness, telling myself, "You're just being silly." The first time I glanced back, he hadn't moved, though I could still feel him watching me. As I left the grass of the park and approached the street corner, I felt briefly relieved. I was back under the street lamps, which by now had flicked on. Only 3 or 4 short blocks until I was at the church. I glanced once more to reassure myself that I had worried for no reason, expecting to see nothing. I mean, by now the man should be completely out of view. Instead, though, I felt the pit of dread in my stomach turn to acidic fear when I realized that the man was in fact halfway across the park now, walking in my direction. I immediately crossed to the other side of the street and began walking faster. At this point, I could feel the adrenaline rushing through me. I didn't have any real words or images to describe what I thought would happen to me, just a jumble of snippets of news reports and vague fears about what happens to young girls out alone at night. I was still trying to convince myself that it could just be a coincidence. The man could just be walking in the same direction. After another block, as I approached the next corner, I looked back again. The man had now reached the edge of the park, and instead of walking straight ahead, he too had crossed the street to my side. Even worse, it seemed like he had closed some of the distance between us, and to my eyes at least, it seemed like he was walking faster now. I immediately felt my terror increase. At this point, I was convinced that he was a predator, and I had made myself easy prey by being here. I still had 2.5 blocks to the church, but at this point, I was wondering whether I would ever make it to the lock-in. I glanced back at the man once more, and he had closed the gap even further with his longer legs. I still couldn't clearly see his face, but I had seen enough. I turned around and I started all out sprinting up the street. My backpack thumped against my back, my heart raced, my breath turned shallow. I ran all the way to the church parking lot before I looked back again, and by the time that I did, the man was gone. But I could have sworn that I heard feet slapping the pavement as I was running. To this day, I don't really know if that man was after me, although I do lean on the side that he was, or if he just thought that I was some weird kid running down the street at dusk. Frankly, I'm actually pretty glad to have never found out, one way or the other. I'm not going to preface this post with I know this sounds crazy, because, well, it isn't. This is a regular experience I've had over several years of dog-sitting gigs at a turn-of-the-20th century mansion in my neighborhood. A friend of mine will also dog-sit at the house if there are dates that I'm unavailable, and she shares this experience too, and often feels like she needs to pretend that she's somewhere else in order to get through it. So, I met a really nice family through a friend who were looking for a dog sitter for their puppy back in the fall of 2020. I started doing a long weekend every few months, and then the owner asked me to help her out for the spring breaks or summer trips that they couldn't include their dog on. The house is absolutely beautiful and is a precious landmark home in our historic neighborhood. It's big without feeling imposing, and you can tell that the owner loves taking care of it. She decorates to make every nook and sitting area comfortable and inviting, and there are beautiful family photos all over the walls. In short, it's a catalog home. And most importantly, the dog is a very good boy. I often feel quite guilty when she and I interact, because as beautiful and welcoming as her home looks, it makes me feel absolutely awful. Whenever I stay there, I feel completely exhausted. I have a hard time moving. I feel listless, deeply sad, and strangely scared to leave the house as well. Usually, the longer that I stay there, the more agoraphobic I feel. When I do muster a ton of effort to go out to buy groceries or run an errand, I always feel like I'm not alone, like as if something has followed me, and I dread returning to the house. I am an active person, and I usually wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so it's unusual for me to feel so heavy and unable to do things. I have also heard footsteps around the house and often wake up sweaty and terrified in the night with no apparent cause. I saw my boyfriend briefly yesterday, and he commented on noticing a big difference in me compared to 2 days prior, before I went to the house. I didn't really know what to say to describe how I felt and how I was acting, and he was so worried he thought in a matter of 2 days I had decided I wanted to break up. We've been in that disgusting phase of love that everyone talks about, but today was my last day in the house after 3 days, and after yesterday, I knew I had to fight this energy demon, for lack of a better word, and go for a walk at the park. It was spectacular, and I was out for about 3 hours. With each step, I felt more of my energy evaporate from my body, even off my sweater. When I returned to the house to pack up my things, play with Doggo, and let him out one last time, I felt like the energy returned full force. The words that I would use to describe that feeling was like it was a spiritual assault, I guess. I tidied up the house and gathered all my bags, but the whole time it felt like some energy or spirit was arguing with me not to leave, and following me each step that I took, even in and out of the bathroom. As is usual for my stays at the house, the energy completely vanished the second that I finished the dog-sitting gig and stepped out of the house for the last time of that gig. I've been saying no to this very nice dog owner more and more over the last year, and my friend who needs extra money has been helping out. I warned my friend that this house is a really strange vibe, and her first time over there, she texted me very early on that she felt super off, and we have compared experiences ever since. Another friend of mine hung out with me there when I was really lonely and depressed because of the house, and she very quickly became off too. I know that this kind of sounds like The Shining, but the best way that I can describe this feeling is that the house, or something inside of it, wants to slowly drain me until I completely melt into it and become a part of the house. I know it sounds like psychosis, but I can feel something battling with me every time that I try to leave, and something draining my battery every time I give up and stay. I've considered the usual environmental suggestions like mold and gas leaks, as it's an older home, but just before I started sitting there, they did a full renovation including inspections, and the family seems very nice and happy from my interactions. The only slightly off thing I noticed is that the owner, though very kind, is very paranoid and anxious. She often mentions how desperately she needs to get away when she asks me to dog sit. But heck, who isn't anxious these days, right? This house, though, is just a standing paradox. It looks like an all-American home. It's bright, full of light, and checks the boxes of every HGTV lover's wish list. But I absolutely, deeply dread it. There is something wrong with it. So around 11 years ago, I was a telecoms engineer. A normal day went to a few residential houses, either fitted or fixed phone lines. Everything was no different from any other day. But then I downloaded my next job and I got a 20-line installation. Now, this is not the norm for the role that I had, as these tasks usually went to other teams, really. No issues though. I thought that it would be nice to be somewhere for longer than an hour or two, I guess. Better than being here and there and everywhere, I suppose. And I called the contact. It's a contact center who tells me that either the caretaker or manager of the building is aware and will explain what was required when I get there. So I arrive, and it's a really old building built in the 1920s, I later found out. I make my way in, tester and tool bag as is the norm. And after speaking with the receptionist, I discover that the building was at one point a nursing home, and after being derelict for a few years, it's now being used as offices for various businesses. As promised, 2 managers arrived to tell me that they think what I am looking for is in the cellar, as there's a lot of cables down there, and that's all that they really know. So I asked if the caretaker is about, as they usually know these types of things. I was told that he wasn't, as he was ill, but due back in the next day or two. I follow this man and woman to a number padlocked door, and they open it, tell me the code, and on the other side of the door is a stairwell that just leads down to the cellar. So as we get down there, the light is pretty poor. In fact, it's really poor, I guess, but I have no chance of working like this, and I mean, there were lights, yes, but you're talking to pendant lights that weren't really great, and understanding this, the woman tells me that they have hanging lights, so no issues. I go back to the van, grab an extension, and head back towards the cellar. So as I'm passing the receptionist, she asked us, "Are you going to be in the cellar on your own?" So I just replied, "Yeah, sometimes you have to, but if what I'm looking for isn't there, I won't be for long, I guess." She laughed, but told me, "Better you than me. Nobody likes going down there, even for storage space." Now, I'll be honest, I just thought people don't like stairs to a dark place. No worries, but not something I'm unfamiliar with, so it just needs to be done. And after a quick look around with the make manager, we find a socket. I sort the lights, and yeah, there is the DP that I'm looking for, but it's an older sort of solder block, no good for broadband, so I let him know that this is going to take a bit longer, and this is even before knowing where these 20 lines need to go. He just agrees and shows me where the office fitters have left all the cables for the clients, which to my relief was in the cupboard behind the receptionist. So all set, knowing what I know, I now crack on. I'm testing all the lines, and it's going pretty well. I've more than half gone through all the cabinets and a few shy, but I know the area and know from there I can get them through, as it's got 200 pair cables that run through it. At this point, it's around 4 o'clock, and I don't have the blocks that I need on the van, so tag up the cables and turn off all the lights on my way out before closing, and lock the door on the way out too. I sign out and tell the girl at the desk I'll see her tomorrow, and I leave. On my way home, I call my manager to tell them the script and that I may actually need a hand for half a day or more, as I'm not even sure anything has been done in the exchange yet. The next day, 8 a.m., I get a call from one of the other lads who tells me that he's with me all day, and that's all that he knows. We sort out a roll each, and I'll push the pairs from the box to the cab, and you do the cab and exchange if needed, and then it's just a case of fitting the box and running a large internal cable from the box to behind the receptionist. I make my way into the building once again, open the door with the code, and to my surprise, all the lights are on. Now, I am 100% sure that I turned them off, so I'm guessing one of the managers may have come to check if I was still there and left them on by mistake. I go down and do what I need to do and leave to push through the cables outside, call my mate, and he's getting them by one, and so it's all going well. I finish up and I head back to fit the block. As I grab the blocks, drill and all the bits and etc., set up mark for the pilot holes and just hear, "What are you doing?" After nearly jumping out of my skin, I turn and see this man with grey overalls on. So I say, "I'm just doing what's been asked of me. Are you the caretaker?" He replies that he is, and he says that nobody has been down here for years, and he was surprised that I was there. So I just cracked on, done the drilling, etc. And then as soon as I'd stopped with the drill and it was quieter, this guy just sort of started chatting away, like, what football team do you support? Do you mind if I watch what you're doing? I told him no worries and just tried to be polite as I could. He then told me that his name was Gordon and that he'd been working there for over 30 years. A bit confused, recalling that the receptionist had said that I told him that I was under the impression that this place had been empty for a few years, and looking at the cabling, it's been updated for at least 15 to 20 years. He just said that things are always happening here. After about an hour of back and forth while I'm working, I hear a hello from the top of the stairwell. Expecting Gordon to answer, I didn't. Then it came again, so I turned around and Gordon has gone now. I'm thinking that I've been waffling for 10 minutes and he's not even here. I pop up and it's one of the managers asking if I'm expecting somebody, another engineer, so I apologize and explain the phone signal isn't very good down there, so he probably hasn't been able to get a hold of me. All cleared, he comes down, we chat for 5, and he tells me that we'll start at the receptionist stand and work to me while I finish. After a quick toilet break, I go back down and I'm in the final stages now. I'm just putting phone numbers to pairs as for when my mate gets there, we can connect the test and go. As I'm doing this, I hear, "Sorry about that." Again, out of nowhere, it's Gordon. So I just acknowledge it, call him clever, and make a joke that if they can't find you, they can't ask you to do anything. I continue for 5 minutes and I've done all that I can, so I tell him that I'm just heading up to assist my mate and we'll be done soon and out of the way. Gordon then told me that he liked the company and it's been nice to talk. I felt saddened at this point, thinking that he was maybe treated poorly by people that I'm in the building with. So I just said, "Of course, mate, costs nothing to be nice and have a chat." So I go up the stairs, leaving Gordon down there and help get the cable through a void and into the cellar. 10-20 minutes of trying to fish it through, we got it and we go down, and Gordon is not around and we finish. My mate tells me it's time for food and he'll go to the chippy and meet me back at the yard, as I tell him that I just need a few signatures and to make sure the lights go back on so that I can get my extension lead. I get what I need from the manager's signatures and show him where the link is behind the reception. I inform him that I need to get my extension lead, so are the lights okay there for now and all that? Or does he want me to move them as we go and there's a good light? And he states that they might as well stay for now and he'll get another lead in case anybody else needs to go down there. I head down and start unplugging the lights, and Gordon appears again, telling me that he didn't realize the lights were mine as he wouldn't have touched them. Straight away I thought, so that's why they were on this morning. But then it dawned on me that the door, it was locked. I asked him if he came down yesterday evening and he said, "Yes, of course, I'm always here. It's where I'm needed." Confused and just wanting to disappear at this point, I said, "No worries. Nice to meet you," and I place my hand and put it to shake out. He just raises his hand and says, "Hope to see you soon." So that was a bit weird, but I left, signed out, and thought nothing of it. So weeks go by and I get a call from our control asking if I can return to this address as one of the lines isn't working and it's high level. So I say, yeah, no worries. I get there, say hello again to the receptionist. I asked if I could just check behind her first before having to go into the cellar. With some joy, it ends up being there. It just needs to be put on properly. And as I'm sorting it out, an older guy, he asks me if I was the one who was there last week. I say yes. He apologized and stated that he was the caretaker and had to take more days off than planned. I just told him, "Oh, don't worry about it, man. I'm sure Gordon will tell you where everything is." And as soon as I said this, he just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What did you just say?" So I said, "Gordon. He told me that he's the caretaker here." This guy went absolutely white and just asked me if we could talk outside. So, of course, I followed him and he simply asked me if I believed in ghosts. Then he told me that before this was what it was today, it was a nursing home, and the old caretaker, his name was actually Gordon. He knew this as when the building was taken over, he found an old desk to do lists and letters and requests for a Gordon, and there was a sign on the door which said caretaker, and where this desk was, that door led to the cellar. I immediately rubbished this, obviously, and started laughing, thinking him and his mate were just pulling my leg. He then asked me, though, if he was wearing overalls, which I replied he was. He just sort of looked at me dead in the eye and said, "Listen, mate, I'm not lying. Gordon passed away years ago, supposedly on the job. I just thought you should know, and it's not something that's considered funny, telling me that he has been mocked as he has also seen Gordon, but people just have never believed him. And I never really said a thing to anybody beyond that. Until one night fishing with a friend, and just like he said, he thought that I was just messing around. But I know what I saw and I know what I heard. I don't normally tell this to anybody as it's just not really worth the ridicule, but after this experience, all I can say is that I guess ghosts or spirits, they're real. The summer of 2008 was a really rough time to graduate from college. I had just spent 4 years getting a degree, only to find out that the job market had all but dried up. As bummed out as I was about being unemployed for the foreseeable future, I found a deep appreciation for backcountry camping and hiking that summer. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains and graduating from a college in western Montana, I was not a stranger to hiking or camping. But that summer, it became an escape to the point of almost an obsession. Going on daily hikes and camping beneath the stars really helped my mental health while I worried about my life's purpose and my future. It was June though, and seasonably cold, wet and cloudy. The daytime highs barely touched 50 degrees, and at night it dropped below freezing. Despite the weather, I had planned to hike around the Anaconda Range that week, and I was going to let that deter me. My plan for the week, funny enough, was to hike from Storm Lake, over Storm Lake Pass, and down to Upper Seymour Lake. Storm Lake, actually an alpine reservoir, is a challenge to get to and requires a 4x4 pickup and some skilled driving too. The road is a narrow 2-track winding its way through the thick pine forests. The way was slick with rain, but I made it to the top with little heartburn. I set up camp on the north shore of the lake and I decided to do some fishing. The fishing, it was miserable. It was cold and nothing was biting. But the best thing about bad fishing is that my thoughts were free to wander while I sat on the shore. The rain was a constant light drizzle and created a natural white noise, which was nice. Time passed and my daydreams were cut short as a low rumble from up the canyon overtook the sounds of the rain. The rumbling was not unlike a distant diesel engine, I guess, but there are no roads that go beyond where I was camped. No machinery or vehicles could be up that canyon too. Maybe it's a plane, I thought, looking up in the rain clouds. But the sound wasn't getting closer or further away, and the sound was above me. It came from beyond the lake and up into the canyon. But the sound was sort of stationary, I guess, and constant. This was most certainly not a plane or a truck or a bulldozer. And while all of this wasn't outright scary, nevertheless my hair stood on end while I sat there listening. After 20 minutes, the rumbling faded away and I was left again with only the sound of the raindrops. Soon enough, I caught a decent-sized trout, cleaned it, and I headed back to camp to get ready for dinner. The fish cooked up fine, but to be honest, I hate trout, so it's edible, sure, but totally unappetizing, for me anyway. They just taste like mud, I guess, and I ate as much as I could stand and tossed the rest into the lake. Building up my fire for the night, I sat back to enjoy the evening with a bit of whiskey. Night came fast, too. The mountain ridges put the sun to bed early here, and the rain clouds obscured the starlight as well. It was dark, in fact, really dark that night. The sounds of a crackling warm fire and the rain bouncing off my tent were a great comfort, and starting to lull me to sleep. I reminded myself that I needed to build up the fire before bed, so I walked over to my pile of scavenged firewood and grabbed an armful. But being away from the fire's crackling for a moment, I could pick up that all too familiar rumbling rising in the background again. It was growing louder than before and closer as well. I thought to myself that I may have had a few too many pulls of whiskey and was tired and grouchy. This noise was ruining my camping trip and my buzz as well. So frustrated, I yelled into the blackness of the night, "Hey, shut up!" And like a switch being flipped, the rumbling stopped, and so did the rain. I will admit that at that, my heart skipped a beat. I realized that that was not a convenient coincidence. There was an intelligence out there, something sentient, observing me and responding to my screams, and I wasn't getting the most positive vibes from it too. I threw all the logs on the fire and I retreated back to my tent. More on edge than ever, I just sort of sat there, listening to the fire crackling, to my rapid breathing, and beyond that to the silence of the darkness. Before this moment, I had felt alone but safe. Now, I felt alone and vulnerable. Beyond where the firelight faded, I felt as if there were a million eyes in that dark, watching me. My paranoia began to subside when the rain suddenly started again. Not a drizzle, but a massive downpour too. I was glad that I had built up the fire, or it would have been snuffed out for sure. Unfortunately though, my tent was being pushed down by the force of the storm. I thought about bailing to the truck, but I knew that I would be soaked to the bone instantly. Risking injury or death over getting wet is the kind of logic only whiskey can produce, right? I could feel the rainwater pooling and moving under my tent. This storm wasn't letting up. The urge to get into the pickup and drive away was even more tantalizing. I could get my stuff tomorrow in the daylight and spend a few nights in town, but I'd had a bit too much to drink. Driving, especially on that slick, muddy two-track road, would have been a death sentence for sure, I thought. But I still needed a safer place to sleep than a wimpy tent. So, grabbing what I could, I ripped open the tent flaps and I ran for the truck. I was soaking wet by the time that I settled into the driver's seat and locked the doors. Turning the heat on full blast, I hoped that would dry me out. It was going to be a miserable night though, so I reclined my chair and tried to calm my thoughts with deep breaths. The rain wasn't letting up. I was warm from the heater, thankfully, and I was riding the crest of a good whiskey buzz. The fire was still raging despite the rain, and kept the campsite well lit. Now, I remember the truck's clock reading 1:06 a.m. Then I blinked. It was only a moment, but when I opened my eyes, the rain had suddenly stopped. In fact, it was foggy and quiet. The once raging campfire was now just embers. And the weirdest thing was that there was morning twilight to the east. I instantly looked at the truck's clock and it now read 5:45 a.m. It was morning. That couldn't be right. Almost 5 hours gone in the blink of an eye? I must have passed out or something. My head was killing me all of a sudden too. To be honest, I didn't feel like I had drank that much to justify that kind of hangover. I turned off the truck and I stepped out to survey the night's damage. My tent was now completely flattened. The tent poles were shattered to pieces. Everything was soaking wet, and smothering the remains of the fire, I dragged all my junk to the pickup and I tossed it into the bed. My hike over the pass wasn't happening today, that was for sure. It was around 6:30 a.m. though before I finished picking up camp, and as I climbed into the cab of my truck, I then heard that rumbling again through the morning fog. As soon as I heard it, I drove out of there as fast as I could down that muddy bobsled track of a road, not once looking into the rearview mirror either. I have never been back to Storm Lake, and to be honest, I probably never will.